Gratitude note to Ramdas ji. With folded hands and a heart full of gratitude, I thank Ramdas ji for bringing the divine treasure, miracle of love into our lives. This sacred book, woven with stories of the boundless blessings and miracles of Neem Karoli Baba Ji, serves as a lamp of wisdom and love, guiding us on our spiritual journey. Through your work, Ramdasji, you have not only shared the essence of Babaji's teachings, but also gifted us a downway to feeling his presence, his grace, and his infinite compassion. I humbly seek blessing from all those who walk this spiritual path to grant me the strength and privilege to complete this book reading series with devotion and clarity. May Neem Karoli Babaji's love continue to flow through these words and touch each heart, including mine. Jai Gurudev. Now I'm starting with the reading series of book Miracles of Love Introduction When the Flower Blooms. In 1967, I met my Guru. That meeting changed the course of my life, for through him I came to perceive my life in spiritual terms. In him I found new depth of compassion, love, wisdom, honor, and power, and his actions stretched my understanding of the human possibilities. I recognized in him an alliance of the human and the divine. After our initial meeting, I remained in India and close to him as I was allowed to be for 5 more months before returning to America. Before leaving India, I had received his Ashirwad blessings for a book which until that moment I had had no thought of writing. Back in the West, I found my kindred souls open and ready to share what I had received, and his blessings and their thirst gave rise to be here now. In 1970, I returned to India and remained with him off and on from February 1971 until March 1972, when my visa expired and I was evicted from the country. However, with him or away from him, I remained the source and impetus of my spiritual awakening. From the beginning, I had wanted to share him with others, but initially he forbid me bringing people directly to him. I relatively few, several hundreds. Westerns nevertheless found their way to him and were taught at the core of their being as I had been. On September 11, 1973, he died. Or, as an Indian would say, he left his body. In the succeeding years, I have found that the absence of his body has not diminished his influence upon my life. To the contrary, with each passing year, I have increasingly experienced His presence, His guidance, His love, and each time I have taken myself too seriously, His cosmic giggle. This suggested the possibility that others who had never met Him in the body could similarly be touched by Him. This suspicion has been confirmed by the surprisingly large number of people who have reported that through book, lectures, tapes, and personal contact with devotees, they have experienced him in a way that has graced their lives. I speak to him as my guru, but in fact, I never think of him or our relationship in such a formal way. For me, he is very simply Maharaji, a nickname which means great king. So commonplace in India that one can often hear to tea vendor addressed thus. Those of us who were with Maharaji meet again frequently in India or in the West. The conversation invariably turns to recollection of him. Stories after story pours forth, and each story is punctuated with silence, laughter as we were savor its depth and elegance. In those moments, the space became rich with the living spirit, and we know that he is among us. In my travel, I have now met thousands of awakening beings whose open hearted receptivity makes me want to share the intimacy with Maharaji to which stories about him give rise. And yet, thus far, only a few, very few stories about him, primarily concerning my personal experience with him, have appeared in print. It was in order to rectify this situation that the present book was undertaken. Immediately after his death, I encouraged several veterans in their plan to travel throughout India collecting stories. They were able to obtain some 400 anecdotes, but at the time they found many of the Indian devotees hesitant to speak about him. He had always frowned upon their talking much about him, and they were still that restrict feeling that restrictions. In 1976, two of us were again in India and found to our delight that many of the Indian devotees, who of course had known him for more extensively and over the course of many more years than we had, were now willing to freely share their treasure of stories. At that time, we collected 1200 stories. Since then, with the help of other Westerns, we had added an additional 400 stories gathered from the East and West, thus bringing the total number of stories and quotations based on interviews with over 100 devotees to over 2000. Of course, even the 100 devotees are altogether but a fraction of the thousands who were touched by Maharaji in the course of his life, each of whom holds some precious memories and piece of the puzzle. But lest we would drown in such a ocean of recollection. At a certain point, I made an arbitrary decision to stop gathering and begin to organize what we already had. The devotees whose stories are included are from a wide range of social and cultural positions. Interviews were gathered from important officials in their offices and from sweepers on the streets. We tapped discussions of the women from the Himalayan hill village as they squatted warming their hands around their cool breezers in the late afternoon. We listened to immenses in living room, streets, temples, compounds, while sitting around fires under the stars in cars, hot tubs, airplanes, and on long walk. Stories were offered by Hindu priests as they puffed on their chillums, by professors, police officers, farmers, industrialists, by children and their mothers, who spoke while stirring their bubbling pots over wood and charcoal fire. Always there was the same feeling of shy joy at sharing such a private, precious memories with another. These gatherings to speak about him were indescribably graceful. Having gathered these stories, our next question was how to present this formidable body of material. For 3 years, I had been working with with this problem, writing and rewriting. My initial efforts were more in the way of personal chronology, but I found that such a structure did not easily include all the material, and additionally, it demanded the inclusion of much that seemed irrelevant. So I started again, and this time incorporating my personal experience as merely additional stories and grouping selected stories around various tropical headings. The result is the present complication. These stories, anecdotes, and quotations create a mosaic through which Maharaji can be met. To hold the components of this mosaic together, I had used an absolute minimum of the structural cement, preferring to keep out my personal interpretation and perspective as much as possible. But this strategy of sharing with you the material in its purest form makes precious little compromise from your motivation. For I have excluded the usual seductive stories, lines that would make you want to read further. I did not want to manipulate your desire to want to read about Maharaji. Rather, I merely wanted to make whatever was available to me available to you. As you will see, Maharaji demanded that all of us make some considerable efforts to have his darshan, the experience of his presence. I feel that it is in the spirit of his teaching to demand that those readers who would have his darshan through his book make a similar right or real efforts. In the sense spoken by the Buddha in the eightfold path. So, if you approach this book with the desire to meet him and have his darshan in a way that could profoundly alter your life as it has ours, then you will want to work with this book slowly and deeply. I can only ensure you that, in my opinion, each story carries some teaching and is worthy of reflections. You will neither want to nor be able to read his book through from cover to cover in one or even a few sittings. Rather, being fine brandy, sorry, rather like fine brandy, these recollections must be sipped slowly and the taste and the aroma allowed to permeate deeply into your mind and heart. And remember to listen to the silence into which the stories are set. For true meeting with Maharaji lies between the lines and behind the words. For this effort, you will be amply rewarded through meeting a being of a spiritual structure rarely known on this earth. It is difficult to separate Maharaji and his teachings from the environment in which I knew him. His form, in its largest sense, is for me India and beautiful hills of Ganges. It is his devotee and all their tenderness and bickering. It is his temples and the photographs of him. His teachings were the love of the earth mother that I first experienced in the Indian village and my dynasty and visa hassles and scared cows and the rickshaw rides, teeming markets and misty jungle walks. And yet, while the drama of being with him was played out on the rich stage of India, the value of the sitting seemed merely as a reservoir of experience through which the teaching could occur. He himself did not seem particularly Indian, no more Eastern than Western. Although we met him in Hindu temples, he did not seem me any more Hindu than Buddhist or Christian. He used all the stuff of our lives, clothing, food, sleep, fear, doubts, aspiration, families, marriage, sickness, birth, and death, to teach us about living in the Spirit. By doing this, he initiated a process through which we could continue to learn from the experience of our lives, even when we were not with him. This account, at least in part, for the continuity in his teaching that we have all experienced since his death. I hope that through working with these stories, you can turn your perceptions in such a way as to meet and begin to dialogue with Maharaji through the vehicle of your own daily life events. Such a moment to moment dialogue carried on in our hearts, in one's heart, is remarkable form of alchemy for transforming matter into spirits through love. I have been hanging out with Maharaji in just this way, and I can't begin to tell you, Ramdas ji. This was an introduction of the book Miracles of Love. I'll be starting with the chapter. Each chapter will come in a new video. Please support this moment and the series of reading book Miracles of Love. Thank you. Keep supporting. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel.